Welcome everyone to this session where we'll be learning about the challenges the team in Birmingham have had to overcome to enable the first clean air zone with charging to go live in June 2021. I'd like to introduce our panellists. Firstly, Nick Richards, Transport Delivery Specialist at Birmingham City Council.
Hello.
Hi there, Nick.
Hello.
Hello, welcome.
Thank you.
Ashley Bijster, Managing Director of Imperial Parking Enforcement. Hi, Ashley.
Hi, Teresa. How are you doing?
Yeah, very well, thank you. Thanks for joining us, Ash.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
It's great. And also Nick Cary, Director of Waysphere Transport Intelligence.
Hi there, Teresa.
Hi there, Nick. Hi, welcome. Welcome all. So, to start us off, Birmingham is one of the 5 English cities to have been mandated by the government to introduce a clean air zone. Of those 5, Birmingham will be the first to introduce charges for a Class D clean air zone from June 2021. Initially, the concept for implementing the clean air zone seemed relatively straightforward, but as the details around the charging and enforcement were worked up, several major challenges were revealed. A number of these challenges relate to the interfacing between existing systems and between new and existing systems. The learnings from this should help others working in and with local authorities to be better prepared for implementing new technologies alongside current systems. So to start us off, Nick Richards, starting with you, can you help us understand what is a Class D clean air zone and what will it mean for the people of Birmingham travelling in and out of the city from next June?
Right, so a Class D will affect all vehicles except motorcycles, and it will be affecting non-compliant vehicles. So that will be lorries and HGVs and buses, which will be Euro 6, well, less than Euro 6, so 3, 4, 5, and vans and cars, which will be Euro 4. So it's Euro 4 or better. So anybody whose Euro classification is lower than that will have to pay to come in. And so currently, for cars and vans, it will be £8 a day. And for buses, coaches, that will be £50. HGVs, £50 a day.
So quite an extensive area. And I think that's right, isn't it? It's one of the first CASs that will actually have the charging applied. Is that across such a wide level?
Well, I suppose in terms of, yes, the categories of vehicles that are affected, yes, it will. It is the first Class D. That's about as far as you can go, really.
Yeah. So a bit of a challenge all around.
Yes.
So what made you? How did you first get involved with the CAS design and implementation? Can you tell us a bit about the history of that?
Yeah. When I first started at Birmingham City Council in 2014. As a sort of senior engineer, a sort of junior in that, I was given the task to start implementing bus lane enforcement. So that was sort of sticking an ANPR camera on a lighting column, putting a couple of signs up, and working with the IT guys to make sure that the images were processed and turned into a PCN for the naughty people who drove in the bus lane. And we thought when the CAS came in and it sort of came into my boss's desk, it felt like it's just a bit like bus lane enforcement. It's, it's sticking a camera on a pole, putting some signs up. Yeah, that's a job for Nick, and that's what it was. I wish I knew what I know now.
So it sounds like, yeah, I mean, things have obviously got a little bit more complex since then. So can you give us a bit of a feel of some of the things that first made you realise that it was actually going to be a little bit more complex than that?
I think the way that we should look at it is think about 3 boxes. And one of the boxes is the cameras and the camera solution and the capturing of the number plate data. There was another box which sort of central government through DEFRA were going to organise, which was the organising the payments, reconciling the payments against the number plate, working out about the compliance of the vehicle. And there was a whole raft of things in there, which was, it's really about the compliance and have they paid. And then there's the third box, which comes back to the local authority, which was around the enforcement. And that's just like enforcement for bus lane enforcement or parking enforcement. A number plate comes in, they've done something naughty, you issue a PCN, and then you go through the process and they have an appeals process and things like that. So that was the original model, and that fits in nicely with BLE and enforcement. But as we started digging down, and it was sort of, originally it was going to be you pay on the day and that was it. That was your only choice. You just paid on the day. And then it started, oh no, we want to give people a bit of a margin of error. They can book in advance and then you can pay after. And as soon as you do that, you're then starting storing data. And you end up storing things, and then you've got to store it. And then you've got to start asking the IT systems have got to, do they ask daily or do they just ask once at the end of it? But if you start keeping things, you then end up with having lots of photographic images and GDPR issues and all that data protection issues about storing people's data. If you have, say, a white van who drives in and out daily on an hourly basis, well, you've got to do a lookup against that vehicle every time. Is there a way of deduplicating that? So then there's there were some changes in the scope from central government, which enabled meant that the payments and the vehicle compliance weren't going to be reconciled. And that fell on to the local authority. And then some of the payment issues, and then where was the money going to be kept? And it's all down to money at the end of the day. Now, I think when we set off on our journey, which is we had set out our FBC, our full business case that said we were going to do this, and what we're doing now does not reflect what the full business case was. We had this 3-box model. It was sort of plug and play. We take the ANPR, plug it into the central government service process, and they churn out some numbers, which are all the naughty people, and we just issue a PCN. It's not like that at all, and it has got very, very complex. The only saving grace in the whole of this is the back end, which is the PCN issuing. That is, with a bit of fiddling around, is mostly straightforward. There are some
bit you kind of had before, so the other 2 parts you were explaining there were kind of new bits then, if you like.
But then I suppose the next sort of challenge then, I suppose, is we know that people would like to challenge. So they will always try and deny that they were actually driving in and things like that. And so we couldn't, and because there was a literally 14 days, 13 to 14 days in which people could drive in and out, they may have forgotten what day they paid for, those sorts of things. We then needed to develop a case management system, which would allow our enforcement people to make inquiries over that full 13 days. Right. And if it was just one day, they could just say, you paid for Tuesday, but you drove in on the Wednesday, terribly sorry, PCN. But somebody could say, well, I have paid, and we need to prove that they haven't paid. And we also need to prove they could have said within those 13 days, there could be 2 Tuesdays within that 13 days. And they say, well, I paid for Tuesday, but they could have paid for the wrong Tuesday. So it's not necessarily to help the driver. It's to ensure that the enforcement team have the full story, so that when somebody who gets issued with the PCN, we can explain to them the whole story and say, you did come in on a Tuesday, but it was the wrong Tuesday. Yeah. And then the business rules kick in about whether that's, and then the enforcement team can make decisions about whether that's okay or not. But the principle is, we need to understand the full journey of that vehicle. Yeah. And we need to understand when they paid, how they paid, and make sure that we're certain that when we do issue a PCN, that it's a valid PCN.
Yeah.
I think that's the truth.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. I think you do have an example around the Children's Hospital, which I think we'll come on to in a minute. But I just wanted to bring Ash in here a little bit. Ash, I think you've mentioned you were becoming you're already involved in delivering the PCNs and enforcement more broadly as your organisation. But I think when you started to hear about the clean air zones and the kind of the apparent complexity around it, or it kind of got you thinking, didn't it? Can you share a little bit more about your thoughts around that?
Yeah, it was really interesting. I was actually at a conference, and I remember being sat there listening to a consultant talking about the fact that these clean air zones were going to be funded by JACU. They were going to be implemented in the UK initially this year, but obviously that hasn't happened. And I can remember being sat there and thinking to myself, because it's just one contravention, and the consultant that was speaking was talking about how complex it was and having to deal with the likes of, you know, registering the debt with tech, having to deal with the appeal service and TPT. And I was sat there thinking about sites like Birmingham, who have a huge remit in terms of enforcement for parking. And I was sat there thinking, these guys are probably dealing with 70 different contraventions in the one system, you know, and they're doing that really, really well. This is one contravention. It's really, really, really not difficult. And that led me then to meeting up with Nick, because I knew that Birmingham was one of the sites that was looking to implement clean air zones. And we have a very good relationship with Birmingham. We've supported them for a number of years with our enforcement systems. And I remember having a chat with Nick when I first met Nick, and I don't know whether you recall Nick, but saying to him, the enforcement part is actually going to be really easy, because it's just another contravention. And as Nick's already alluded to, very, very similar to bus lane enforcement. And it's actually everything else which is going to be the more complex piece of the project. So hopefully Nick felt supported, had a nice warm fluffy feeling, but it was just to say, you know, it's not difficult, it's not going to be hugely expensive, because you have a system already in place, and it's just a case of us working with you and understanding what, you know, what that requirement is, and then building the system.
Yeah, wow. And I think maybe just an example for people to kind of relate to, both of you have spoken to me about this, about the Children's Hospital. That's one particular example, isn't it, where you've had to really think around how to do that. Between you, do you want to share a little bit more about why that was complex and what you've learned from it and where you are with it?
I'll set the scene there, really. In order to mitigate against some of the sort of what could be considered unfairness of the, you know, it being dropped in on people, there were a whole raft of mitigations put in around residents, workers, people on low pay, you know, having to use their vehicle to get in. And one of them was we actually had a sort of a regional hospital within the area, the Children's Hospital, but we also had 2 medical centres who offer out of hours service, emergency care. And one of the things that we didn't want people to have to do is the councillors quite rightly turned around and said, we don't want people who are going to the Children's Hospital to have to pay. You know, if you've got emergency care, we don't want you to have to worry about paying. You know, and it's fair. And the exemption is for 2 years, for 1 year for the hospital and 2 years for the others. And that set out a separate challenge. How do we can identify the vehicles, but how do the people tell us that they're exempt? How do we prove that they've been to the hospital? Now, there are lots of things that you could do. Those are IT systems and technology and things like that, which just flags up other issues on there. And I'll go through them in a minute. But the solution that we came up with, and it's working up something that Imperial already have as a product they already have, but we will issue effectively a voucher. It'll be a voucher with a security code and a sort of rub off silver foil strip. and the person will be issued with one, and then they rub it off and type it in on the Birmingham website. They'll type it in, and it will generate a whitelist. Effectively, they'll go on this sort of one-off whitelist, and they'll have 7 days in which to do the activity, because they won't get it until they've been into the clean air zone and been to the children's hospital. And there are some business rules attached to that which the enforcement team will use, but effectively that will give them the get out of jail free card for those times they're going in there. The children's hospital have an opportunity, if somebody's going to be on a permanent basis, you know, the child's going to be in there for weeks, to issue some. We have some security built in so that they don't suddenly end up on eBay. So we will, you know, they will be kept in a cupboard. So, but we don't want them suddenly to be on eBay and people to sell them, because that brings both the children's hospital and BCC into disrepute, and we don't want that to happen. But we had gone down and thought about the technology route, and the reason we discounted that, one, we're only having to have the system in for a year. But secondly, who owns the equipment in the children's hospital? So if you put an iPad, fix it to the wall and have it, you know, put in your registration, what if it goes wrong? Yeah. Now, you then end up with a maintenance agreement. You've got to have a power supply. If it breaks, the onus then falls on the poor old reception at the hospital, who's probably having to deal with some very distressed parents or children that go on there. They don't want to be they don't want to be worrying about a piece of kit. So electronic equipment that's gone wrong. So there was sort of, we think we could probably get it, but for a year it wouldn't be worth. It's sort of the tech vouchers is fairly low tech. It's just an opportunity. The receptionist gives the parent a voucher. It also fits in with one of the other things that the National Health Service also do, which is it's a thing called Every Contact Counts, and it's an opportunity for the medical staff to engage with the carer or the parent to try and discuss other things, how they're feeling, because they know that they're all upset about things, and it's an opportunity to have that other engagement, an excuse to have another engagement away from the serious issue that may be going on. So for a very short period of time, which is 12 months, there are some advantages for both parties to do it that way. The issue comes if we're asked to extend it for a longer period, and potentially the voucher system then starts to be very, very cumbersome, and you want to be a bit slicker. So we haven't had any direction yet from, you know, in terms of what the policy will be about what happens to the clean air zone, whether it deals with particulates or we're going to go down to a ULEZ or something like that. But in the back of our mind, we have there is a legacy issue that we need to bear in mind. And, you know, the voucher system works for us at the moment, but we might need to go down a tech route if it needs to go for longer, and also if the CAS ceases to be a CAS and becomes something else.
That's really, really interesting. And, you know, just I'm sure there are many other issues you're dealing with in terms of the CAS, but I think that just really brings it home in terms of some of the things kind of on the ground that you've had to kind of try and work with, and yeah, appropriate responses to situations bit by bit.
I mean, a shout out has to go to the children's hospital, because, you know, this is another activity they have to get involved with. And, you know, I won't say they've been wholeheartedly in favour of it, because I don't think anybody is, but they have accepted that this is a need to support the parents and the carers of the children. And this gets us through gets the parents and the carers through a difficult position for them. Yeah. And, you know, and the medical centres. And we've done a lot of work with them and consulting them and trying to get the right way to do it and what are the services to do. We've tried not to be too prescriptive in saying, yeah, they must have an appointment and the appointment must be there, because we know that that's emergency and A&E. It doesn't work that way. We've also set up some business rules. You know, they might lose the ticket, they might lose the voucher, and the hospital will, you know, they will have records of them, and they've said that they will reissue a ticket if they need to. We just have to ring up, you know, the enforcement team will just ring up, or our CAS team will just ring them up and say, we've had an inquiry, can you help? And the hospital have so far have said, you know, we will sort that out for you, don't worry, we don't want our parents to be, you know, in trouble for driving into the CAS. So it's unfortunate in one sense that the children's hospital is sort of just inside the CAS. You know, it's literally, you know, it's not in the core, it's on the periphery, but it is in there, and the same with the medical centres.
Yeah. And I think those examples for me just really bring home, I mean, I think you touched on it earlier, about the kind of overall kind of top-down implementation, well, not implementation, but the need to implement a CAS came from higher up, but actually it's yourself and the teams kind of on the ground that have got to work through quite a lot of these intricate areas to actually figure out how you kind of implement that. I mean, I wonder whether Nick, sorry, this is getting confusing. Yeah. Cary might want to come in on some of that. I mean, in terms of, I think you've had some experience, Nick, not necessarily in clean air zones, but in principle between the kind of implementation of newer systems and kind of integrating them into more local ones. Maybe between the two of you want to explore that a little bit more.
Indeed. Well, you know, I actually want to lens out first, because I just want to remind us sort of the size of the prize. The size of the prize is improving air quality. Now, it may be that there will be other effects, and it may be difficult for motorists to negotiate, particularly if they purchased a car and they still got it, and they absolutely depend on that vehicle. But the size of the prize is improved air quality, and we've had, as a society, you know, a gradual education in this, because we started off with something that was very CO2 driven, and not just us, but the whole world. You know, oh, we've got to reduce CO2. Diesel was an obvious means of doing that because of the efficiency of the drivetrain. But of course, what arrived with it was increases in air quality problems with more NOx, nitrous oxide, more sulfur dioxide, and more particulate matter, which diesel engines, even if you do have filters, do tend to spit out. And you know, as central areas of cities started to suffer from that kind of pollution, so it moved the agenda on. And it's absolutely laudable that you know, ministers who own policy start with an initiative to try and deal with that. Fantastic. But having worked in central government, both initially, you know, for the Millennium Dome was the place I started, and then the Cabinet Office, and then moving into the MOD, and then finally the Department of Transport, hence, you know, my bringing out the inner geographer in me. I have seen how what starts as a policy on behalf of people becomes a complicated thing to deliver. And it has to be said that local authorities really are expert at delivery. It's what they do. You know, I mean, central government does not collect our bins, to give you one sort of rather trite example. And we're hearing in spades from Nick just how incredibly able he is at navigating and negotiating this. And there's no book. Nobody's written the book of how to stand up a clean air zone. And I'm sure that central government has found it challenging, because there's an awful lot of moving parts involved, and the interfaces between local and central government are challenging ones because of the devolution agenda, things that make it difficult to know where the boundaries are. But from a central government point of view, we would think, because we always thought like this when I was there, we thought like this, but I'm not speaking for them any longer. But from that kind of point of view, one doesn't want to land people in a postcode lottery. So one doesn't want a completely different user experience in one part of the country to the other, particularly in something like transport, where people go from place to place to place. And you can't have, oh, you know, your vehicle's valid here and your vehicle's not valid here, etc. It becomes very confusing, and it actually increases the risk that people will respond and say, well, it was valid in London, why is it not valid in Birmingham? And one final point, we have a massive challenge in Birmingham. So I think if Nick and his team can achieve this in Birmingham, then he's set a template that the whole of the rest of the country can can learn from, but because Birmingham right now has more freight moving through it than most other parts of the country. It also has a certain railway being built. It has a lot of re-engineering work being done on Network Rail, and it has a lot of motorway work being done by Highways England. That means, particularly in a part of the world which has been the home of the motor car industry historically, for many decades, where people were educated that driving a car was a badge of honor. Now the challenge is that if that affects air quality because it's not the right propulsion system or whatever, that is a challenge for people. But we need the societal change, and so collectively we have to work together to deliver it.
I mean, I would say that, I'm quite lucky in Birmingham that our cabinet member is wholeheartedly embraced sustainable transport, and without that, the governance behind you and that the local politicians behind you, that it goes nowhere. It's you get the officers doing it because you've got a ministerial directive, but if the local politicians haven't bought in, you're wading through treacle. If your cabinet member turns around, I want you to build it irrespective of what central government says, then you're better off doing it. That's the way to get it done. You take your instruction from your cabinet member, really, not the minister. The cabinet member is the person who you're trying to please.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ash, obviously we've been quite rightly focusing Nick's here. We've been learning about the Birmingham one, but as a company, you've been obviously your presence across England with other authorities as well. You've presumably seen some other experiences of this and other challenges. Do you want to add anything to what's been said so far?
Yeah, we've also been involved with Leeds, and we've got a few other local authorities that will be going down this route. But I think what was really great about the Birmingham experience, and I think with Nick and his teams, one of the things they did really, really well that I would encourage anybody else that's looking to go down this route was the collaboration that was involved. So Nick and his teams made sure that all the stakeholders got together on a regular basis, because as Nick has quite eloquently told us, it's all about the what ifs. And it's all about kind of analysing what's it going to look at, what's it going to look like, what are the challenges that we're going to face. And we had several technical walkthroughs. I used one of our senior analysts just to work with Nick's team and his stakeholders, just kind of looking at what it might look like and what those challenges were going to be. And I think that was a really, really positive way to approach this project, because like you've already said, nobody has written the book and nobody really knew what those challenges were going to be. So you need to work with the teams, collaborate, use all of that kind of information and experience that you've got around you, and basically map the solution. So I think that worked really, really well with Birmingham.
Fantastic. Do you want to add anything to that? I was going to say Nick, but either Nick actually.
I would. I would have to say that both our suppliers and our other stakeholders have been really supportive, and I would agree with Ash that we've had, even with central government, we've had a bit of a beef about it, but they're in the same boat as we are, really, that they haven't quite appreciated how complex it's going to be. They've had lots of suppliers and stakeholders, the thing that they thought was easy. I hate to say it, but we've muddled through. We've been making the rules as we go. Really bad project management. It's a really bad project management way of doing it. But nobody knew what the brief or the scope was. We knew what the destination, we knew what the end point was, but we didn't know the journey. And without people, working through the problems and saying, well, we could do it this way or we could do it this way. The number of times somebody put something forward and it was knocked down, or the number of times I threw the teddy out the pram because somebody said, well, we can't do that anymore. We've got to change it. We've got to start again. But we're in a really good position. I think, if you can't if you can't have conversations with your supplier, and you know, you're paying the money, but if you can't have the conversation with your supplier and say, I don't think that's going to work for me, and they come back with another option and say, I think this is what you want, and you can do that. I think that's where it works better. And collaboration. I know we still have a client and supplier relationship. There's still a contract, a piece of paper between us, but that shouldn't stop us problem solving and working through that.
I think that candor is what's so important. One cannot, with this kind of thing, because there is not a book that's been written on how to stand up a clean air zone, the candor of recognizing that we're going to make mistakes and that it's a journey, and that our suppliers, central government, our cabinet members, and our officers have all got to join in this together, and be prepared for a few changes, essential changes having to be made along the way. I'd much rather work with a chap like you, Nick, that recognises that you cannot just follow a specification, that you have to be able to flex and change and learn. That's fabulous. That's really what I encourage everyone to do in all projects, because there's no way you can specify everything up front ever.
I mean, I think, I have to say, again, it's all credit to my boss for giving me the head to get on with it. I mean, I think at one point he described me as a maverick. I am the least maverick person ever. But it was an acknowledgement that sometimes the BCC way doesn't get you to where you want to, that you might have to go and talk to somebody, and you might have to explore an avenue that might appear to be a bit darker at the moment, but that might open up the route to get you to where you want to be. It's also about a lot of people understanding that we're under a time constraint, not a money constraint. Those are, local government is fixated on the cost of things and not the value, would be my way of looking at it. We know this thing costs a penny, but it breaks in 30 seconds. Why don't you buy the biro that costs £1 that's going to last you for 2 years? So sometimes it's the cost and the value of things, and you might have to you might have to explore something and do something that's not quite the way you would normally do. Convention, I think, is the council's called policy, but it's convention, the way we've always done it. And that doesn't work for something as complex as implementing a CAS, I think. And you need people who are prepared to back you up to go through that. I've got a great team. Who work with me doing stuff. I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't have them to, push me along a little bit, and to do that, traveling down the road that I've pushed them down, and we've explored things. And we've got Ash. Ash is on the end of the phone. What happens if we do this? We have a strict client supplier relationship, but there's always a phone call away and say, well, what happens if we do this? Where does that take us? And the same with our supplier. I suppose I ought to give a shout out to Siemens, because I haven't mentioned them yet. They're our AMPR supplier and the camera solution. And again, the same with them. And I mean, they've had the same battles I've had with the central government in terms of the scope of the project. Again, how the vehicle checker changed, how the payment portals changed, all those things has an impact on their system. And every time somebody changes their mind somewhere, it has an impact on the way the system's delivered.
And would you say you'd be able to apply or do things more like this for other projects? You've kind of almost been trained through it, I guess, by having to be more adaptable.
In my career, I've always been given little things that have always been a bit challenging for people, that have always been a bit novel, that have always been a bit out of the ordinary. And they when I look back at them, they're not that extraordinary, but they've always been not the norm for the team that's supposed to be doing the delivery. And it's sort of like, I'll give that one to Nick to do, because it's a challenge. Nick finds a way of doing it. The problem solving bit. Nick finds a way of doing it. I do have quite a good personality, so I can usually convince people to do the thing that I want them to do.
Always helpful.
I do. And also people are very wary of me that if I do lose my temper or do get angry, then I am fairly annoyed. But I stand up for conviction, and I don't, and the clean air zone, the cabinet member has said, we will deliver a clean air zone. I believe that this is the right thing. It's the right thing to do in order to achieve the compliance that we need to do. I mean, there's lots of other things that we could do. We can plant ivy in trees, and we could do all those sorts of things. The revenue implications are there. There is no revenue attached with this. This is a capital project, purely capital project. And I think the best thing for me that ever happened was a friend of my wife. They were a work colleague. Her daughter suffers from asthma, and one day she came up and said, I can't wait for this to happen, and gave me a big hug and said, thanks for doing this. And you just think, okay, that's one person who's going to benefit from that. But there's other people out there who they thanked me, but they should be thanking the cabinet member for doing it because he's pushed it forward. And, a big shout out goes to all the people who've helped me get to that point of getting to the point where delivery, we're reaching milestones now. We're getting to the point where we're still having the little fights and the things, but we're getting to the point where we should have 90% of the signs up. We should have all the cameras up, and we'll be starting the rigorous testing regime after Christmas.
That's fabulous.
And we'll be looking at live testing. So we'll be having some volunteers who will be making, potential payments and then refunds, and we'll be testing the system end to end, fully end to end. They'll be getting fake PCNs. It's what 2016 sort of started it going. I got involved in 2018 after the bid had been put in, and to see us getting to the point where we're nearly through the door, and
must be really, really, just a huge kind of relief in a way.
And to see, and see the outcome and achieve what we set out to do. And I hope all the suppliers and and everybody who supported us gets the buzz that we will from getting this done, and it will work because it's a radical change. And what's reassuring, I suppose, is the clean air zone is one element of Birmingham's attempt and to tackle poor air quality. And there's loads of stuff going on, and I'm forever getting phone calls from people saying, oh, I'm going to do this, how does this affect your clean air zone? And I go, well, it's actually a positive. You're doing things, and that's going to be a positive.
Fab. Fantastic, Nick. Thanks so much for that. I mean, it's just really inspiring to hear that from your perspective, kind of coordinating and kind of going through all those challenges and kind of coming out the other side. Are there any final points that either Nick or Ash want to add to this session based on what we've heard and the kind of the Birmingham story?
I think one of the other things that that I think Nick picked up on as well early on, and I remember with the meeting with Jaku, Nick, was about the educational piece. Because with all of this, we're talking about kind of, can you come in, can't you? And then we're talking about enforcement. But we were in a meeting, and it was very, very clear that from Birmingham's point of view that they also want to educate people coming into the city about, maybe different mechanisms, different modes of transport. If the vehicle isn't a vehicle that, that can come in, what are my options? So I think there's that whole educational piece that has to be thought out as well. Because it is a positive, because it is, it is going to have an impact on the air quality in Birmingham, and it's just making people understand and also understanding their role in that.
I think the classic example, which is to pick up with Ash, I think, was when we went to see the first show and tell of the payment portal. And basically it came up in big letters, you join, you type in your registration number and it comes, please pay, in big bold letters, in bright red flashy letters. And I'm going, that's not what this is about. Surely this is not what the clean air zone is about. The payment is an encouragement to change. It's an encouragement to change. And if you can't change, there's a means in which to do it. We have to do this thing. And I've noticed that there's slightly changed, you know, and what we wanted to do was look at the means to help people to change and the way that they travel. COVID-19 sort of got in the way, but there's still opportunities for people to look at that. There were lots of mitigations, travel vouchers, you know, scrappage schemes for the cars. There's still lots of things in there for people to do. So it isn't all stick. It isn't all stick, and that's quite a useful thing to know.
Yeah, absolutely. Excellent. Nick, any final points from you?
I think I'm just so glad that I've heard today about the skills, the sensitivity and the practicality of Nick and his team, and how Ash is supporting him, and how she's been able to identify the bits that are easy, but also the bits that are far more challenging. And you know, it's a tough gig, and it's great that we got people who have a lot of flexibility, a lot of empathy in the way that they deliver it, because it is about societal change, and societal change is always challenging, and we cast ourselves as individuals in this, and we think, why have I got to do that, you know? And so given a bit of time to adjust is absolutely essential. I'm so glad we got folk like you doing it.
Yeah,
thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time today. It's been really, really insightful. So thank you very much.
Thank you.